Welcome to Sun Valley Shop Talk, the podcast about the folks, stories, and happenings around Sun Valley, Idaho. Today in the shop, we are excited to welcome the man, the myth, the legend, Steve Porino. He is one of the most respected voices in skiing and sports broadcasting. Steve's love for skiing started early, thanks to his father, who was a competitive skier in Italy and Switzerland. At 14, Steve's skiing journey took a major step forward when he enrolled at the prestigious Burke Mountain Academy in Vermont, which was a training ground for many elite skiers. His hard work and talent led him to the U.S. ski team in 1988, where he competed as a downhill racer for 4 years, including 2 seasons on the World Cup circuit. During his time on the team, Steve traveled the globe, training in places like Argentina, New Zealand, and Europe. After retiring from professional skiing in 1992, Steve transitioned into a career in journalism, starting as a writer for Ski Racing magazine. His deep understanding of the sport made him a natural fit for broadcasting, and he soon found himself working for major networks such as ESPN, Universal Sports, and eventually NBC Sports, where he has been a prominent figure since 1997. Over the course of his broadcasting career, Steve has covered 6 Winter Olympic Games, the FIS Alpine World Cup, and major cycling events like the Tour de France. In 2015, Steve was awarded the prestigious FIS Journalist Award, recognizing his outstanding contributions to ski racing journalism. Today, Steve continues to share his passion for the sport with audiences worldwide, while also balancing life as a dedicated family man. So, welcome, Steve, to the shop.
Wow,
did I miss anything?
No, man, you did some homework.
Good.
And you reminded me of some things I forgot.
Yeah. Good. Well, I think we want to start asking all of our guests when we start our the shop talk is why are you in Sun Valley? What brought you here, and what keeps you here?
I think part of me wanted to get to Sun Valley before I actually got to Sun Valley, so it was always in the back of my mind.
Yeah.
It was that great ski town that still had its authentic roots, and that was my sense of it without actually having lived here. I had friends here. I came here and raced. It just had a great vibe to it. I always raced here in the spring, by the way, and I always thought of Sun Valley as being super warm. So that's not on the brochure. Yeah. Is like the overnight low of 0 degrees all January, February. But I was living in Bend at the time before we moved here, and I love Bend. But when I moved to Bend, it was 40,000 people. When I left, it was 85 and growing, all right? And my daughters were ski racers. And, I actually didn't, even though I went to Burke, as you pointed out, I didn't really want to give my daughter away to the East Coast because I wasn't going to go with them, right? I wanted to be with them. And so this seemed like a better place to grow up as a ski racer, not just to be a ski racer, but because it's so part of the community that my kid could have a normal life, if you can call any kind of life in Sun Valley normal. It's pretty sweet, right? But in Bend, it was problematic. They spent, even when they were young, almost half their day commuting. And so I was kind of projecting that forward. Once you get into high school, what's that going to look like? You're not going to be part of high school. The ski team, as you got older, got smaller. So I could see both of their worlds shrinking and me just sending them off to places. And so anyway, we tried this out. The irony, of course, is that I was with their stepmom at the time. We both moved here, and this is a place where I know lots of people. She wasn't going to know anybody. We had a not 1-year-old, and then our daughter entering high school, and then one was staying back in Bend, and then I had to leave. As you pointed out, I covered the Tour de France. So I came here. I gave, 2 kids to my wife, a 1-year-old, her stepdaughter, trying out Sun Valley for the first time. I'm like, got to go for a month. I hope you like it. And I thought I was going to come home to a truly empty nest, right? And 2 weeks into it, she said, we're never going back. And so anyway, long answer, but one of the things that we wanted when we came here was to be part of a community. And it's small here. It was very hard to be part of the community in Bend because it's so big and it's so fractured. Yeah. So when instead of one event, where you knew you were going to see people. Like if you go to the concert in the park or whatever, the symphony in the park, you're going to see your friends.
Right.
You don't have to make arrangements. You're going to see them. And Ben got to the point where you had to make arrangements to see your friends, and I'm way too disorganized to manage that. And so, and it's a little tongue in cheek, but the community, it got so fractured there that there was too many people I didn't know between me and my friends. And coming here, we knew we could be part of the community. We could contribute to the community and feel like we made a difference. We were part of it all, and that has come true. And my wife is way more of a star in that regard than I am. I'm just her husband now. I thought I was going to be like, she's going to be like, oh, I'm Steve Porino's wife. I'm like, that is not it. Nobody knows who I am. They know who she is.
Well, Spencer and I come from the surf world, so we're a little bit more into the whole surf world. So we kind of get that idea of having a small, quaint little surf town compared to like living in all of California, where it's so spread out, right? So we kind of understand that world. We're definitely have never lived in a ski town. We've been here for 5 years now, but never lived in a ski town. But we feel it. Like we feel what you're talking about for sure.
Even as someone that, like, I'm not a big skier and haven't been a part of a ski community, but we're still, like, we've only been here 5 years and we feel like we can contribute to the community, like you're saying, and meet with you and have the connections that we had with Harry Griffith and those sorts of things. So that feels really special. Like we can totally feel that as well, even though we're not as, I guess, affluent in the ski culture, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, once you get engaged and people recognize that you're engaged in this community, and there's a lot of ski towns where I think people have this idea of what it's going to mean when they move to the mountains because maybe they made their money and they're like, well, I got to go buy another house. Yeah. And they're, the first thing they do is they put a sup on the roof and they get the bike rack and they buy all the stuff, but it's still got the price tags on it 3 years later, right?
Yeah.
And I find that the people that come here, they're using their stuff. Yeah. They're getting out and they're communing with the people. Like I always say that the water cooler in Sun Valley is the mountain. That's where people go to chat. Maybe you only take 2 runs, but that's where people go.
Yeah. Well, you're a pro in the way of podcasts.
I feel like it now in this place.
What do you think of our podcast?
I think it's unbelievable. I didn't know there was going to be cameras. I've lost count how many cameras there are. I can't look anywhere and not see a camera. I mean, this is as tight an operation I've seen.
Yeah. So you've interviewed quite a few people, I'm guessing. So what would be your favorite interview that you've had?
Man, that's a tricky one.
That wasn't in our questions, by the
right?
way.
No, this was an impromptu interview, but I just got to say this because it was so fun. But I got to hang out with Snoop.
I was just gonna ask.
Really?
Yeah.
And it was super random, but a friend of mine who I did my first ever TV broadcast with. He was 23, I was 30, and we've known each other ever since. He's Snoop's producer. And so he told me that Snoop was going to be at the USA House and nobody knew, and he was going to play, and like the basketball teams were there. And so we went, we watched him. It was awesome. And then unbeknownst to me, he's like, hey, come with me at the end. And so my daughter, who was there, and her friend, Annabelle Viesters, who's, also from here, we all go upstairs and we got to hang with Snoop.
I was gonna ask because I stalked your Instagram yesterday, so I saw the picture with you and Snoop, and that was gonna be my first question. Was that what were you guys like? What was he like, or talking to him and those sorts of things?
Yeah, he couldn't have been more gracious, and there's people that when they're that famous and they're good with people, they've got a skill. He just puts you at ease. And it came up in conversation, right, that he's 13% Italian, which I did not see coming, right? And so my dad is from Italy, so the name Italian, Porino's Italian. Yeah. And he says to my daughter, Reese, he's like, hey, come give your Uncle Snoop a hug. That was the first thing. And then before she left, he made sure that she gave him a hug.
That's awesome.
And he seems... he comes from a different place than I come from, right? But he was super respectful. That's what I gleaned from him. He just being part of the Olympics for him was a thrill. And he was super respectful of the Olympic movement. And, the way he kind of exudes this whole love, right? Yeah. And it's, you don't know how much of it's show or whatnot, but he certainly put out the vibe that he's
Yeah.
into it. And he's talking about coming to the next Winter Olympics. Obviously, he's going to be in LA. I mean, he was probably the biggest star at the Olympics, and that's internationally, right? People
right.
that are not watching NBC knew that Snoop was at the
Yeah.
Olympics.
Yeah.
And
So cool.
and so I think he's gonna go to Cortina. He was already talking to me about what he was gonna wear, and he doesn't seem to be a lover of the cold. That was what I gleaned from our conversation.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Hit that subscribe button and the like button on the podcast so that you guys are connected with us. So we're not having to like email these all out to get people to watch them, but make sure you share them with your friends and family and anyone that you think might be interested. And yeah, hit the subscribe button. So each time we launch one of these, you guys are seeing that they're up and coming. But this podcast is going to be a fun one today. And our whole idea of having Steve on is kind of get a glimpse of what it might look like in a ski town when an event like this comes. And so that's the whole purpose of this podcast. But Steve, my question to you is that you are used to going to some of these ski towns and seeing what kind of effect they have on a town like ours.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like you have a pretty fun life, and I think I'll throw that one in on there too that you can answer. And traveling the world and doing what you're doing, what is that going to look like for a small town like Sun Valley?
Yeah, I don't know the answer, and I think that nobody really knows the answer. But you're right. I've been to a lot of ski areas, a lot of these events. But the secret that I don't think is so much of a secret anymore these days, and these days have been going on a long time. I do a lot of stuff remotely. So a lot of the races, some people say, it must be so great to go to all these events. Well, I cover men's and women's World Cup, and they happen within an hour of each other, and they're in disparate countries, and they still think I'm on site. So, the reality is once the World Cup leaves the U.S. and it's not a world championship or an Olympics, typically I'm in my garage.
Wow.
So I don't know how that squares with your image of my sexy lifestyle. But a lot of these ski areas, they are small, right? And they do obviously manage, the last World Cup finals. And so that's what we're talking about. And so for the audience, what that means, it's different than having a World Cup where typically you're going to have two disciplines, a downhill and a super G, or a giant slalom and a slalom. And those are slightly different worlds. They're slightly different populations, but it's one gender and it's going to be a smaller group of people. World Cup finals are more elite in that rather than a World Cup which might have 70 starters, only the top 25 ranked skiers in that discipline get to go to the World Cup finals.
Wow.
So for me, it's a much better format. In fact, as a broadcaster calling 70 racers, if they could do it this way, every race, I'd be the first person to put my hand up. But so you have all of the men and the women who are ranked in the top 25 in the four disciplines of alpine skiing, slalom, giant slalom, super G, and downhill. So it's a mini world championships that we're hosting here. World championships would not have a limit on the number of people that can enter the race. So you're hosting in a much smaller window. So we're doing this in
10 days.
It's going to be 10 days. Gotcha. Yeah. So it's very truncated in terms of so it's all action. So that means that you gotta, you don't have the full complement of a single World Cup in terms of athletes, but I think all told, we're going to have about 800 to 1,000 that are involved in the race. So it's a pretty big impact on the community. And it's been done before in small ski areas like this. When you think about Norway hosting the Olympics in 1994, they pulled it off. And, Lillehammer is a small town where they hosted, the races. It was like a lodge. A lodge, and then a bunch of houses scattered around. So it can be done, but you need creative minds.
Were you there at that race?
In '94?
Yeah.
No. I did that. I was off the team in '92. So my shot at the Olympics was in 1992. But I ended up being the fifth man on a four-man downhill team, losing the spot to local legend Reggie Christ.
Wow.
But we're still friends.
Well, so for the World Cup, it's top. You said top 25
Per discipline.
Per discipline.
Yep.
Okay, and then that isn't limited to nation, or Olympics are. Is that right? Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
right. So you could get 10 Austrians.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because I remember I was reading into another interview that you had back like years ago, where you're talking about the difference of the World Cup and the Olympics, and how it's much harder to win a World Cup than it would be in Olympics because of that. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Because there's so many more guys on the if there's 10 Austrians and there's 2 Americans, like just in terms of ratio. Whereas Olympics, it's equal opportunity, I guess, in terms of
the field is just reduced.
Okay.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Again, great research.
Yeah.
So there are some countries like a Switzerland or an Austria that have a fifth guy that didn't make it that actually has a shot at a medal. It was certainly true 20 years ago. I mean, there was a race where the Austrians went 1 through 13.
Wow.
Because you can't put 14 people in a race, right? I mean, so you can imagine it's not quite like that now, but to your point, it is. That's what makes it harder to win a World Cup. And what also makes it, you'll often hear if you're inside the world of ski racing, is that, is it more prestigious to win a globe, which is, there's a discipline globe. So there might be 10 or 11 slaloms in a year, and it's the guy or woman who accumulates the most points in the discipline wins the globe. So that's your body of work for an entire year versus 2 minutes at the Olympics. And so the most prestigious thing to win are the globes. And those globes get handed out at the World Cup finals in Sun Valley next year.
That was good. On top of what Dan was saying, I'm curious, like, as an American, you have so much anticipation for the Olympics, whereas the World Cup, I feel like in the West is not as exciting for the United States. Whereas you were mentioning earlier in Europe, there's way more anticipation for the World Cup than it would be. Can you speak into that a little bit? Like explain maybe what are the Americans missing in terms of how important this event is, which you just spoke into about the globe.
We have a much busier sporting landscape than Austria and Switzerland. It's not like Austrians and Switzerland aren't aware of all these other sports, but they don't have participants in a lot of the sports and as Americans, we have winners. Just look at the Olympics, look at the Summer Olympics. What is it? 32 different sports.
Yeah.
And we've got winners in all of them. So we have to spread our attention around. And as we know, like what takes most of the oxygen out of the room is the NFL. And it's just, there's no competing with that. And then it's the NBA, and then it's baseball, and then it's hockey. Those are your big four. And after that, everything else is fringe, and particularly Olympic sports, right? So you cannot, people get super excited about watching the downhill at the Olympics. It draws a big audience, but it's not culturally relevant. We don't, I mean, when you think about where our population resides, and then you just say, how many of those people see snow? And then of those people, how many people see people compete on snow? And of all those competitions, it used to be 35 years ago, it was only alpine skiing and Nordic skiing. And now you've got all these other different things. So it's a divided audience. And in Europe, it's rooted in their history. And a lot of these events like Kitzbühel, that is the granddaddy, right? So many people have heard about it. Not everyone. And I think this is the key to all great sports, is that there's fanfare around it. Because, people that go to watch a football game, I mean, how many people care who wins or loses? But how good's the tailgating? And that matters. I mean, honestly, right? How good's the tailgating? How good's the party? How good's the entertainment? How good's all this? How good's the vibe? How do I commune with my people?
Right.
And so skiing doesn't have that history, so it's harder to get people to rally around it in the same way. But this community is steeped in ski racing from a density standpoint more than any community that I've lived in, and I've lived in a lot of them. Did I answer any question?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. To me, it sounds like in the U.S., it's more of a niche sport, but where in Europe, it's more mainstream just because of in terms of relation to its history. But also, it's cool because Sun Valley it's also so steeped in European culture, which is fun, and that probably relates to its ski history as well, just by comparison.
Yeah, there's absolutely, and you need a couple of generations to be involved in it. And so in Europe, there's multiple generations. And like I said, Kitzbühel, it's such a party that you've got people filling the trains coming down from Germany, and they want to go to the Londoner bar, and they want to be part of the party, and they don't care who wins. But it makes the event super cool because it's got such a good vibe. And so many of these events it's not just about the skiing, it's about being part of this thing that is 100 years old and going and watching. But not every World Cup race, just like not every baseball game, they don't pan wide at a lot of baseball games because they don't want to show you how many people aren't there.
So it's kind of about the environment. Like I'm thinking, so you say you're in your garage most days.
Yeah, nights.
Nights.
Graveyard.
Nights.
It's graveyard shit.
So have you ever been to an event then?
Yeah.
Okay. So what's that look like when you're at that event? Is it like we talked about last week? Is it a party, or is it like? It's that whole environment, like you're saying, like the tailgate party,
Yeah.
And so we're gonna have bands, and we're gonna have food, and we're gonna have different
put it this way,
attractions for people to.
Killington, has done an amazing job because Killington and the people of Killington, I don't want to offend anyone, but they know this, right? The weather that rolls around the time of year that World Cup happens is not always awesome. It's not always the most inviting. It's not, when you think of going to an outdoor concert, you're like, let's go to Killington on Thanksgiving. And yet it doesn't matter. And the people are hardy out there, and they put on a show.
Wow.
And also within 3 hours of Killington, unlike where we are, you got 90 million people. And they draw a massive crowd.
Wow.
20,000 might be a stretch, but 15,000 people to 18,000 people both days. Michaela Schifrin is part of that draw, but the music is part of that draw, and people want to be part of a party. So I know, it feels really cool to be in Killington, even if it's, blowing sleet sideways. It's still, and people are out there and they're loving it. Yeah. So that's what it feels. That's, in the US.
Yeah.
Right. And then you go to Europe, and like those places like Kitzbühel, it is a party. Wengen, it is a party. Not all of them, but the really prestigious, long-standing races are a party. And that's what if you want to feel what it's like to be in the Alps and like life is good in the mountain, that quote there. Yeah. That'll give you a nice taste.
I'm just so interested about the U.S.-Europe comparison because it's fascinating for fans and sports. But is that like, is that like household familiarity? Like ski racing is just like, that's a household thing. Like, the names, people are watching. Like if you're going, if you're in Kitzbühel and you're nearby, well, is that super remote? How remote is Kitzbühel?
No. Okay. You think like really nothing's remote in Europe.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So people are going, and that okay. Yeah, I just think that's interesting.
And it's more. If I got to be honest here, that is much more of a Austria, Switzerland, right? And a little bit of northern Italy.
Gotcha. Okay.
What they would love nothing more, the FIS, which is the governing body of alpine skiing, is to have a bunch of German stars, which they don't have right now, because Germany is 90 million people. Switzerland is, I don't know, it's 8. Austria's 12, something like, right? But Germany, which has, which is not an alpine nation, but Bavaria, southern Germany, is alpine country. And so it's not like everyone in Germany is is coming down to. Like I said, it's the Germans that come to Kitzbühel that know nothing about skiing but want to be there for the party because they do know something about drinking beer, and so they want to be part of it. But they're not coming down for the ski race. So it's really that centralized alpine area that does, schedule their day around the first run and the second run of a technical race, and then they stop everything for Kitzbühel, the downhill.
So what would you expect here? Like you think people, Park City, a bunch of people from Park City are coming, from Boise, like in terms of proximity where Sun Valley's at, do you feel like we're going to get the big load of people coming in just regionally, or people are going to be flying in from Europe? Like what's your anticipation for that?
Yeah, because I've seen so many domestic races.
Yeah.
Right? Beaver Creek is maybe an interesting comparison because it's not nearly as remote, but it's somewhere between 2 and 5 hours, depending on the traffic, from Denver, from a major population. And during the World Championships, big crowds, 10 to 15,000, sometimes bigger, but then they'll have other races where it's 2,000. So, that's probably more. We don't have 90 million people to draw from like Killington, right? It's a simple fact.
Yeah.
And we are remote. So I would be, if we were somewhere in that 6,000 people, watching every day, I kind of think that's the right number. I would not expect 15,000 people, and I think they'd all starve to death because we don't have enough food here. What's the biggest event? I heard someone saying that at the Symphony, it was the Star Wars episode where they did the live music.
Yeah,
it was like 11,000 last year, and you felt it, right?
Yeah.
Or like Wagon Days. Like Wagon Days, what do we get? I don't know. We don't know. Even numbers bigger than that, but you feel it.
So speaking of mountains, and Harry had a question. This says, how does this downhill rank versus World Cup venues in terms of challenge and difficulty?
It's all downhills have their own particular character, and I would describe this as a modern downhill. So there's an old downhill in Switzerland called the Laberhorn. It's in Wengen. It's 2.7 miles long. It's way longer than anything else. It's like two kids wanted to play a game of horse with skis. They're like, let's go over that rock, and then we're going to go under this tunnel and around that house. And then if you can't make that turn at the end after 2.5 minutes, it's nothing but net. It's like, right? It's just like you would never make a race like that then, because skis, they perform differently. It's just like you would never imagine to build a downhill like that. Now, skis are much more designed to turn than they are to go straight. And because of that, the skiers don't slow down as easily. So this downhill is, and I kind of ran some numbers, but it is the most vertical for the least distance of any downhill currently on the World Cup, and any that I can recall. So it's steep, and then after that it's steep, and then following that it's steep. So, which is a real challenge. It also doesn't, we sort of think, it's going to be super fast. It'll probably be one of the slower downhills because you can't let them go. The fastest downhill in the world is the flattest one, the one I just mentioned, Wengen. They're going to go up. They've hit 98 miles an hour.
Wow.
Actually, no. I think one Frenchman exceeded 100 miles an hour.
Wow.
Like if you let someone go 100 miles an hour here, all the shingles would tear off and they'd burst into flames and we'd never see them again. So here, because it's so steep, you won't see super high speeds, but it's nonstop action, meaning that there's no resting at all. It'll be kind of short for a downhill. For a men's downhill, it'll be normal for a women's downhill. And for the first time in a long time I can recall, they're going out of the same start. So it's 822 meters of vertical and fewer than 2,300 meters of length. I don't know, that's a lot of numbers, but it's a 36% grade. The next one in line is 31% grade.
Wow.
Right? That's a big difference in like average slope.
Yeah.
So it will be extremely technical. And if you're a glider, you're not going to like it.
Yeah.
You're not going to. If it was me, I was a glider, I would not like it. I would like hanging out at the bottom
Yeah.
but I won't like coming down.
So are you going to go ski it?
I'm not going to ski it, but
You see how fast you can do it.
Not negative.
Come out in one piece.
Negative.
So does this obviously affect the teams? That, I mean, are there some people that are some racers that are excited about it?
Yeah.
And some racers like, I don't think I want to go to Sun Valley.
Well, no, they gotta go. I mean, it's not, it's the World Cup finals.
They got sick that day or something.
Yeah. It is what it is. That's why the World Cup, these World Cup discipline globes are so coveted, because they are testing a breadth of skills across a variety of courses. And this one will be at the high end of technical.
Yeah.
And the Labrador Wengen will be, a glider's paradise. On the women's side, Cortina is kind of their Kitzbühel. And I think the average grade over the length of that course is 28%. And the women will be facing 36%. That's a lot. This is by far the most technical course the women will face for a downhill.
Yeah, so I go back to the surfing championships.
I was just gonna say that.
Like,
what about trestles?
Yeah, you're used to, like, in California, you're used to these waves that aren't very difficult, and you're not gonna get killed if you crash in them. But when you go to Chopu, that's a whole nother wave.
Right, it's a big, thick wave.
And there's some surfers that are scared to death of big waves. I'm one of them.
Which was where they just had the Olympics.
Yeah,
was that Chopu? Yeah,
right.
So you have to step it up or get out.
Yeah. But for the WSL finals, they decided to change it to trestles because it is the most technical wave in San Clemente, which kind of sounds like a little bit like it really stretches your form and technicality of surfing the wave, which kind of sounds like how you're describing Sun Valley a little bit.
And I don't think it's going to be the most dangerous per se.
Yeah.
Because it's so steep. You can't let the skiers go. There's some things it will lack. It won't. There's no gliding, so it won't just lack it. There's none.
Will it create faster times?
No. I mean, it's not like there's a given distance for a race, right?
Oh, okay.
So the times are what the times are. It will be a relatively short men's course, but you're working the whole time. I don't think anyone's going to come to the finish and wish they had, another 300 meters of skiing to go.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a lot of work.
Yeah.
No rest for the weary on that one. But again, there's not a ton of opportunity to put jumps in, and those are exciting. Visually exciting, that's a big part of downhill. They'll put them in there, but they're so sensitive because, you need a landing where they can go flat and straight and recover and then turn. Here, everything's coming at you so fast. If the jump goes a little bit long, it's like you're screwed, right? And then you have a mess of a race. So this first year, I think, and it's important to note that not typically, it's the way they get a downhill or a race. You first have to run a lower level race, right? You have to run what we call a NORAM, a North American race, right? And then you kind of know what you're getting into, and then you get a World Cup. This is like all they're just showing up, and no one's will have run it. They're going to get some of the younger U.S. ski team athletes to run it in to kind of get an idea. But it's real course setting's really hard. It's hard to anticipate. Are they going to be going 70? Are they going to go 75? How far are they going to fly? You're building something that is really sensitive to speed without actually having any actors in your play.
Yeah.
Before the curtain comes back.
So who makes those decisions? Is there is the FIS committee, like they have their judges and officials come, they grade the area, they see what's going on, and they make the courses based on that?
So the course was essentially built by our locals.
Oh, cool.
Wally Rathgabe, who was a former World Cup skier himself, and he knows the mountain, and he's from here. And the cowboy, Tom Johnson, from over in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And he's kind of known worldwide as he really works a lot on the snow and the final, because there's the ground, there's the earth, and then there's the snow that goes on top of it, and that changes the character entirely. Things fill in, all that stuff. And so those two have built this course. And the FIS came in February. They said, here's a look at it. We think this has to be wider. They have certain standards that you need to meet. And then Sun Valley did just that. Did a lot of clearing of trail to make sure that there was enough room to run the downhill in particular. That's the thing that creates the most onus on any ski area, is how the downhill runs. And so they had all these standards and these safety guidelines that Sun Valley had to hit. And they did all that. And it is my understanding that all the boxes have been ticked and the event has been awarded, and they have a little bit more work to do. But that's where we are at this point.
Yeah, so the last podcast we had with Harry, we talked about the committee coming to town, and that's happened now.
That has happened, yeah.
And you were a part of that?
I was, and it's the first time I've been part of, usually I just show up and open up my laptop and I start yelling the mic, and I don't know all the, and there's so much work. And there's a lot of, the FIS comes in and they ask a lot of the venues, not only in terms of safety, but in terms of resources that go to not only the teams that come here, but all the ancillary staff, all the other stakeholders. So it's a big undertaking for any ski area, a lot. And so I was privy to all this, not all of it, but, as we come down the downhill, it's, we were a group of 25 people, all, with the various stakeholders in it. So it was super cool to watch it. And they were happy. They were really happy.
Did you guys walk it?
We walked it.
Wow.
Yeah. And only one of us fell.
You didn't knock any rocks down the hill?
No, I just slid across them. It was brutal. But again, it's such a short timeline. It's usually, this would be a 2 or a year and a half process. And this is being done inside of a year.
Yeah.
So it is.
That's great. Lots of work.
A lot of work.
Yeah, we talked about that
impressed
with Harry, is having volunteers to help out. And I think if any of you can step up right away, like we had talked about last time, maybe we can throw that up on the screen also. If you guys want to volunteer, there's links to volunteer either your home to help us have housing, or to just help with the event any way you can. We just need volunteers.
Yeah. Course crew is a big one. There'd be like 200 people needed for just maintaining the course. And I think that's actually one of the beautiful things about Sun Valley, even though you kind of need all those people, is, my buddy helps run the race over in Palisades, Tahoe. And it's not unusual that in February they might get 3-4 feet of snow, which just means that no one's going to sleep for a week. Right?
Yeah.
It's brutal. And here, it's very rare that we get these massive dumps.
Yeah.
And we have great temperatures. I mean, I think people from Europe are going to come here and say, wow, I can't believe you can have snow this good this time of year. Because what's happening is that some of these venues that have hosted World Cup finals, which always happen this time of year, they're melting out.
Yeah.
And, you need hard snow. It's dangerous. Not only is it unfair, it's dangerous when you get this like spring-like slop, right?
Yeah, so last year when the race, what race was that came to town?
The U.S. Alpine National Championships, right?
Last year when the U.S. Alpine came to town, they were at that time they had the idea that the race was coming here.
Yeah.
It was being talked about, and they got out there. I watched them with fire hoses. Did you know that? You probably know that. I didn't know that. They have fire hoses, and they're shooting water onto the race course to make it ice. And that's the way you like to race?
I mean, that's the way they like to race. Let's not say that. And that's also what's happened with modern skiing, right? Anyone that they have shape skis, we call them. They're carving skis, and they're very exacting. So you think about the forces and the G forces that are pulling in these turns, like a giant slalom turn. You can have G forces, in the neighborhood of 4 Gs. It's like 800 pounds on that, little bit of edge that's engaged. So, if it's softish snow, by the time you get to the fifth guy, it's a gong show, right? So it's not just because they like it. It keeps the surface competitive, so not vastly different from the first person to the last.
Yeah.
And that said, they do like it because it separates the wheat from the chaff. Like the guys that are really good on super slick, particularly like a Michaela, she's so good on if it's super slick, it's kind of like she shows up with a big Cheshire grin on her face. And the rest of us, I don't even like inspecting the course. You set your edges, you go out, and then you glide back and you get on the side of the course again. But I don't think that people truly get how slick some of these World Cup courses are just by watching on TV. And that I mean people that race, families that, they kind of know intellectually, but then you stand on it and it's like, this is unskiable.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to ask. Just from your perspective as a broadcaster, any race really that you see on TV is so different than when you're there in person, or like even you, if you're broadcasting from visuals on a monitor, like what would you do, or what do you do to kind of communicate to the audience how intense it is, like when you're there? Because I remember even looking at when we're at some of our vacation rentals in Warm Springs, watching the U.S. team warm up on Warm Springs, I was like, what is going on? Like this looks so different even from the base versus what I'm watching when I watch the Olympics on TV or something like that. So what do you do, or like what have you done to kind of communicate that?
Yeah, it's a great question that I don't often answer because I get in this rhythm of talking to people that I can't keep re-explaining it. Yeah. But it's a really good point, because you want to oftentimes. I would say this is a mistake I make, or any broadcaster makes, is that you just get lulled into this is normal, right? And so you start comparing the best to the worst instead of saying this is all impossible, right? And reminding people of just how impossible it is to get to the finish line, or somehow communicating those things. This is interesting, and I just learned this from NBC, is that, so Peekaboo Street, who I think anyone that's, this is
I
her
know
home.
Peekaboo Street.
Yeah, right on.
I don't know her.
You raced?
I know
Did you
her.
race with her?
I did.
You're on the tail. Okay.
Yeah, and we broadcast together because she's kind of gotten back in the fold. And NBC has long been looking for, after Kristen Cooper, who's also, an idol of mine and a colleague who is from Sun Valley, and it was her stepfather, Bill Jans, who owned Sun Valley before selling it to the Holtons. So I'm steeped in this culture. When she retired, they had a hard time finding another female voice for alpine skiing. And so Peekaboo has now gotten back involved. And the way we will do the Olympics is oftentimes I will move to the reporter role. And so then Peekaboo will be as the analyst. And so it's incumbent. That's where I have an opportunity to actually do what you're talking about. You can start to sell pitch and danger in kind of a little story, so that people better understand. I'll never forget when one of my colleagues, Todd Brooker, who's Canadian, put on a pair of skates and he skated around the finish area, and because it was that slick.
Wow!
So he could, the skates worked, and he skated around.
Wow!
And it's not always that slick. So that's a stunt that's not always going to work. But there's ways of communicating some of that stuff, which is a little easier to do as a reporter. And I got to talk to all the people that were, or not all the people, but the people that were involved in camera placement, which is a huge part of it, right? You're standing at the finish in your rental home looking up, and you're in a static position. And so you're seeing people track across your vision, right? If you hold a camera fixed, and someone passes through the frame, you see speed. And if you hold it at the angle of a pitch, and it's static, you see pitch. But of course, you can't have 2,000 cameras and they all go flying through the frame, But we'll have some drone coverage. And so when you kind of follow an athlete off a precipice, and then you see nothing but Warm Springs, the town, you see nothing but the bottom of the lift. They take off, and you're like, oh God,
yeah,
right. It's that roller coaster feeling. So that's some of what's been added to all sports, but action sports make the big difference. So we'll rely a little bit on camera angles to tell that story.
Well, we'd love to have Peekaboo on sometime.
Yeah,
Okay, let's do it.
She knows how to chat. She does.
Well, let's go off subject here just a little bit. In Spencer's introduction of Steve, he mentioned the Tour de France.
Yeah.
Tell us your your job there? What do you do?
Well, I'm not an expert, so I've always been a reporter. And the beautiful thing about being a reporter in the world of announcers being more and more off-site and not on-site, as you got to be on-site as a reporter.
Yeah.
I'm always there. And so I started in 2012, not really knowing a whole lot about cycling, and I think that's generous. And I just sold them on the idea that I'm an outdoor cat. I understand the European mentality. Skiing and cycling are kind of, they're similar. I had contacts. I just didn't know the sport that well. And so anyway, they bit. And I got involved in 2012. My first bike race was the Tour de France.
Wow.
I was a little overwhelmed. The idea that you just go jump in the finish line after these guys have been on the rivet, just killing themselves for 6 hours, and you give them exactly 0 seconds to compose themselves, and you just you get in like a mall of people. It is so uncivilized. It's so uncivilized. And you don't even ask questions. You're like, what happened? Because you don't even know, right? You don't even know what happened in the finish because you're out there waiting for them because you have to compete with the other reporters to be in position. And so anything of note that happens at the finish of a bike race all happens in the last minutes that you don't actually see. So the questions are genuine. Like, I really had no idea what happened.
Yeah.
So could you tell me?
Yeah.
From that, it evolved into a guy named Sam Flood, who's the head of the NBC Sports, who gave me my first job with NBC when he was covering skiing.
Oh, wow.
And we chatted over a beer. That's how I got the job.
Wow.
And that was in 1997. And so in 2012, he said, I think we need to have a motorcycle reporter in the peloton.
Yeah.
Do you want to do that? And I was like, yes, definitely.
So how do you sit on that thing?
You sit facing forward. It's a lot of people think like the cameramen are sitting backwards.
Yeah, gotcha.
That they're not. I think sometimes they do in marathon, but you're going 10 miles an hour in marathon. That's fine. But you do not want to be facing backwards on a
as a
motorcycle
reporter,
going 90 miles an hour.
You're not reporting on the motorcycle, are you?
Yeah, I am.
You're just saying everything that's going on around you.
Well,
and who's in the race or who's up front?
So it started with just audio, and you're in what's called the caravan. So there are 22 teams. Each team has 2 cars. So there's a line of 22 cars, and then there's another line of 22 cars. Because as the race breaks up, you've got car 1, car 2.
Okay.
And then you've got all other medical. You've got print. You've got still cameras. You've got communication. It's just a massive caravan. So you live in the caravan, and riders are coming back, and you see them coming back. So you kind of see everything that's off camera. And then I would go and actually talk to the directors in the car during the race, and sometimes interview them like live from the motorcycle through their window.
That's awesome.
And so you're just trying to give, and again, not now. I did that for 8 years, and then they started putting a pro on the bike, so they could actually read the race in a way I never could. So mine was always straight reporting. I never said anything that wasn't first told to me, apart from my observations that weren't like tactical, those sort of things. But I did that for 8 years, and now I go in front of the race, and I hang out with the drunk people. No, I just all the fanfare, and it's kind of the most unique reporting role in sports television. And it's and the more I do sports, the more I care about first, second, the less I care about first, second, third. The more I care about the stories. That's kind of like the old guy in me. I just like the stories. I like to go meet people, hear more about them.
Yeah.
And everyone has a story in the tour. In front of the race, everyone. So that's what I do.
That's fun. Is that pretty dangerous on the motorcycle?
Yeah, it is, and it's more. I always felt more of a hazard to the cyclists, right? Because what would happen is I don't know how much bike racing you watch, but when you start going up mountain climbs, the race starts to break apart. So it's in little bits and pieces, and you're often in those pieces. And then you go over the summit of whatever they've been climbing, and then you go down a lot faster than you go up. And on the motorcycle, you go way faster because what the first thing you do is you punch it to get to the group that's in front of you, to give space to the person behind you who is ultimately going to catch you. So in the straightaways, obviously a motorcycle can go faster than a bike. In the turns, the bike can go faster than the motorcycle. So between the turns, we'll be doing like 90 on a mountain descent. And it's like from 15 to 90.
Wow.
So it's a lot of like scraping pegs, sparks flying, you know, and then keeping, my pilot was amazing, right? He was just keeping his eye on his mirrors all the time. And so they would, you know, you give them the apex of the turn, right? They set up the turn, they come back at the apex, and we just stuff it right, you know, like on the right lane. If you're taking a right, you're just all the way tight on the inside and just hit the brakes. And I'm just like up on his back, you know, jammed, stopped. And then the moment that guy passes you, back on the throttle. So that's kind of how the descents are. It's just, it's frantic and hairy. And, you know, sometimes, you know, see the cyclists, they catch you and you don't know it. And they just like rip by your mirror. And I'm not worried about me, right? Yeah. They weigh like 11 pounds.
Yeah.
I'm worried about them.
So do you interact with the cyclists, or are they just so focused that you don't mess with them?
You can
you
a little
around
bit.
with them a little bit?
Yeah, you know, again, it's as a reporter, I always talked to, like, my circle of influence was always the directors, because that was like one-stop shopping. So I will interview the athletes periodically. Yeah. But they don't know me the way. So now the guy that's on the motorcycle is Christian Vandeveld, who is part of the Pro Peloton. So he can BS with them and has, you know, a little bit more that, you know, they kind of knew who I was, but I wasn't the guy that was going to, well, this guy's pulse was 180. He's like, crack a joke. Yeah. You know, that wasn't going to be me.
Well, I think I have one other question before we move into information that you could maybe pass along to Sun Valley to kind of help with this event. That is, where is your favorite place to ski?
It's always where the snow's the best, right? It's like, where's your favorite place to surf? You know, it's probably, are you one of these guys that like looks at the
Chases
swell?
The waves? No, yeah. I'm not.
Yeah.
No. I'm like, I'll just go there.
But you know, with local Reggie Christ, and he'll remember this, and he's actually made a living out of it, but we would go to Las Leñas in Argentina. We had ski camps there.
Oh, fun.
And super fun. Yeah. And it was, so we go down there to train, and then every once in a while we just get blown out by snow. And I think it was 1987. We got 3 meters of snow.
Which is like 9 feet.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
Feet.
It's between 9 and 10, which after 5, who's counting, right? You know, and it's a completely, unlike in the U.S., it's completely lawless. You know, they do a little bit of avalanche control, and we were too dumb to know that they should have done a lot more. And we were just let loose in the Andes. Wow. With 9 feet of snow. In fact, you know, when there's that much snow, you have to wait a little while before you can ski. And in that time, we just, it was a 3-story building that we were living in. We just went to the 3rd story and jumped out to kill some time.
That's great.
And so, you know, I have super fond memories of that. And, you know, we built these jumps and we were doing flips and just, you know, again, there was no one there to tell us no to anything. Yeah. And as a kid in your 20s, like that is hard to beat.
Right.
So that's a super fond memory of mine. But, you know, there's nothing wrong with going on a great powder day and skiing off the backside here of Baldy and, you know, ending up kind of just north of Board Ranch and leaving your pickup there and crawling over a couple of rivers to get back to your truck and doing a couple laps like that. Like, that's amazing. I mean, we have that right here. Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah. So.
Great.
I put that high on my list.
Were you in any ski films back in the day, or were you just flat out racing?
Flat out racing.
Okay.
Yeah.
You weren't in any more in.
No, not intentionally. Warren Miller. Yeah.
Warren Miller.
Yeah, he was local here.
Yeah.
When did that kind of start? Like free skiing? Did anybody?
You know what's funny is that I was kind of at the front end of that. And so we were competing with the free skiers.
Gotcha.
We're like, who are these guys?
Yeah.
You know, they're stealing all the money and they're getting all the attention. And, you know, they didn't train. You know, they're just having a good time. And one of those guys was Glenn Plake, who was on the tour this summer. And I know him a little bit, and I'm friends with Mike Hattrip, and those guys were sort of the front end. You know, they were the cool guys. You know, and I was too wrapped around the axle at the time to appreciate just how cool they were and what sort of they were. You know, they were having such a good time, and they were getting paid to do it. Right? That's just genius, and I wasn't really understanding that at the time.
Yeah.
But Glenn Plake, who's the legend of, you know, the first iteration of extreme skiing, it was called at the time. You know, he had the mohawk.
Yeah.
He's always at the tour, and he's dressed up in the American flag. And I interviewed him this year, and he's just such a character. And they put it up on social media, and it was like one of the absolutely most watched.
Really?
Even people that didn't know him, like, who's that guy?
Wow.
I want to be that guy.
I actually coached Mike's daughter in volleyball.
Oh yeah,
So I got to know Mike.
Izzy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. So I mean, Mike Hattrip, you know, Ski Hall of Fame, legend, but you would never know it hanging out with the guy, just as humble as can be. But those guys were, they were stealing my thunder, and they deserved it.
So were these guys that raced, and then they're like, let's just do our own thing, or they were just
they were
skiers
actually more. They were freestyle skiers.
Okay. So okay.
Even worse.
They were guys jumping off a 3-story building just for fun.
Yeah. Right.
It's those guys.
Yeah. They were doing, you know, they were doing all the fun stuff that we still liked doing, but that wasn't our day job.
Well, so we have some questions. I think that we kind of want to help Sun Valley if they dare listen to our podcast. But, what advice do you have from past race events that you can give to Sun Valley?
You know, the one thing I love, and this is right, it's just me. It's not like I have this body of knowledge that I've done this poll from all these people, and this is the consensus. This is me. What I love most about any of these events I go to is when they embrace whoever they are. Right? You know, Kitzbühel's been doing that forever.
I like that.
Right? And you just you feel like you are right in the epicenter of Austria when you go to Kitzbühel. Yeah. So, and I think this is already underway. What Sun Valley can do is really embrace Western roots, and you know, and I see that through Europeans' eyes. Like, think of how romantic they think the idea of being a cowboy is. I mean, Sun Valley is not necessarily a cowboy town, but in a lot of ways it is. Yeah. Right? Surrounding areas, there's a lot of cowboy here. There's a lot of Western culture to celebrate. And so I think if we can do that, that's kind of who we are. And, you know, some of us are all hat, no cattle, but, you know, that is a big part of what this is. And we are also, and I don't think a lot of people, certainly Europeans, realize just we're the first destination ski resort in the country. We have the first chairlift ever built in the world. Smith goggles are the first ever double lens goggle ever built. Scott ski poles were made here. And Chuck Ferries, who ran that company when they started making mountain bikes, was the first person in the U.S. ever to bring mountain bikes to Europe. I mean, it's like so much of what happened, you know, in the world of skiing started right here, and they have no idea. And it's super.
That's a great point.
It's super cool. Even in the Tour de France, I did a big story about how, you know, the aero bars that Greg LeMond ended up winning the Tour de France in '89 by 8 seconds because he won the final time trial by an impossible amount of time using aero bars, which had never been used in a bike race before. They were made right here.
Wow.
By Scott.
Wow.
So it's kind of like that. There's an origin story here that a lot of people don't know. Even though if you live in Sun Valley, everyone knows we were ranked the #1 ski resort in the country, and we've been the #1 for certain categories. But it's not well known.
Yeah.
And people know it, but they, you know, it's always that place that's too hard to get to. And so this is such a great opportunity to show off who we are. They have I keep selling the idea that, so there's a hot seat. When you're in the lead, you sit in the hot seat, right? because it's sponsored by Audi, it's an actually heated Audi car seat. I think it should be the first ever ski lift in the world, right? And it won't be hot, it won't be comfortable, but it'll be cool.
Yeah, that would be super cool.
Yeah. So that's kind of what I hope happens, and that, you know, they already know that, but I think you're just celebrating who we are and having it be a nice kind of Western shindig. And I understand we're gonna have a little ski joring. Do you guys know what ski joring is?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, that kind of stuff is so cool. That's just celebrating who we are.
And where did ski joring start? Is that an American thing? Or
Yeah, it's an American thing.
Okay.
I don't know. You know, I'm guessing
Where that
Jackson,
okay. Yeah.
but I don't
Okay,
know. But it's definitely an American West thing.
We'll have to look that. I'm gonna look that
Yeah.
up.
I kind of like the idea that skiing in America started here too. Like, can we get that as part of the theme of who we are?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You
I mean, you're
sell that
saying
idea.
Western too, but I mean, it's like, I feel like this is Sun Valley. This is where it all started.
It is. No, that's what I mean. Like, this is the first destination ski resort in the country.
Okay.
Right? I mean, there's just no ands, if, and buts about it.
So here's a question from Harry. How does a small town like Sun Valley best prepare for the challenges of putting on a world-class event like the Stiefel Sun Valley Finals?
I mean, I think Harry is doing the yeoman's work here, because it's, you know, it comes down to, you know, how do we get people in beds and how do we feed them, right? Because I think we're used to having this crowd over Christmas, but maybe it's for a shorter period of time. But I also, this is, you don't want to under-prepare ever.
No.
But I've been to, this is the only correction I have to make. I've been to 6 Winter Olympics, but I've been to 10 Olympics.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And so, but my point is that at absolutely every single one of those, it's always, the lead in is gloom and doom. It's going to be too expensive. There's going to be no place to sleep. You never really get a restaurant. You know, it's going to be terrorism. I mean, it's how it's going to be a failure every time. And then, you know, so often it's like, oh, you know, we overpriced everything and now no one's come and everything's at rock bottom rate, right? So I just came from Paris. Like, all the Parisians left. Like, they were like, oh, no. We don't want to be with them. So it was. I've been to Paris at every Tour de France. Like, I have a sense of what kind of a normal day in the summer looks like, and it was, you know, not vacant, but there was elbow room in a way that I don't think I've ever experienced it. I never waited in line at a restaurant. You know, you get close to the venues, it was crowded, but it was a vibe. You know, it was amazing. And so it always happens that people think, you know, it's what did Yogi Berra said? Nobody goes there. It's too crowded, or whatever. Nobody goes there anymore because it's too crowded, right? Everyone thinks it's going to be just like terrible, you know, the traffic, and you won't be able to do this and that. Ain't going to happen. You know, there's going to be some issues, right? Getting people, you know, not in a panic over where to stay. And, you know, I think Sun Valley is going to have a hard time if everyone wants to go to a restaurant.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to need to make a reservation.
Right.
Right. But, and that those are some things to think about. But is it going to be this like, oh, that's the last, we don't want to go there those 2 weeks because it's going to be a gong show. Ain't going to happen. It's going to be cool. It's going to be like just the right number of people to make it feel, I mean, we're kind of a sleepy town a lot of times. We're going to feel like, you know, a good, cool Western vibe. That's what I think is going to happen. Is not going to be overwhelmed by people.
I think so. Are you trying to say, or are you saying, and I'm trying to understand, probably better, you know, for the housing portion of it, which we're working tirelessly on.
Right.
No,
I mean, you understand it better than me, so maybe I'll ask you a question. It's like
he's going to interview us.
Yeah, you know, but it's. I think I've heard people say like, oh, let's go on vacation and rent our house out for $50,000.
I know.
And like, yeah, that's not going to happen. I mean, it's, you know, there's going to be, you'll hear a couple stories of that happening, and someone that has $50,000 to burn like wanted your house, and it's the base, you know, it was a perfect spot.
Yeah.
Right.
But for the most part, it's not going to happen.
Right.
You know, so it's going to be normal.
That's what I was going to
it's
ask.
Slightly above normal. That's what I suspect.
Yeah.
Is going to happen. And if you are out gold digging, I think you're going to end up. Don't plan your vacation yet.
Yeah.
Because you're going to end up with an empty house, right?
That's good. Yeah.
That's a good point because I've been hitting the road. I've been out in these homes, and it's interesting because people be like, "Hey, we just want to volunteer our house." Like, okay, here's what I think you can get for it per night. Oh no, that's not enough money. Like, I'm not gonna do that. I'm like, I thought we were volunteering. The house.
What happened to? So, perhaps we're confused on the term volunteer.
Yeah.
Oh shoot!
But some of the things that might. I don't know if this is one way to play it, but I gave my house over to Marcel Hirscher and his team. Well, that's cool, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I'd like to reserve one room for me because I'm going to stay. So there's going to be, you might turn your house over to, and I know that's happened. I went to Tahoe and ORF, which is the Austrian broadcasters. They told me they were staying in some unbelievable house in Palisades.
Nice.
Because I think it was an Austrian, or they were associated with the Austrians. And he was like, we love ORF. Yeah. That'd be so cool if they stayed at our place.
Yeah.
So there's, maybe there is a little bit of that where people want to volunteer their house to someone, and they can say, Marcel Hirscher signed my wall.
Yeah. Yeah. Fun.
Yeah.
Cool.
So.
All right, what were your?
I wanted to know, because is there anybody that has been a part of ski racing longer than you in terms of you've seen you've raced, you've broadcasted, and then you're behind the scenes with the committee. I want to know what you've seen with how the sport has evolved since you were training at 14 until now. What has changed in terms of technology? I mean, this is a big question, so you can go where you want with it.
Yeah.
But technology and racing, how much has that changed? And then as you're broadcasting and watching, have things shocked you about what racers are doing now? Or has it just it's been a slow evolution for you? You've just been watching so much.
It's changed a lot. It's much more professional. And there's sort of the standards of the FIS. That's what I was exposed to in a way that I hadn't been before. Whereas the sport's become more dangerous, and I can get into that. That's more of the technical side of it. But because of that, they have these big site surveys, and it's a massive undertaking. And, actually, you kind of have to marry the two ideas together. What has happened with technology in terms of ski equipment and what that has done to burden the organizers. So there's what we call A-net. That's that really tall suspension netting that looks like a vertical trampoline. That stuff's expensive, right? And it used to be when skis didn't turn, if you fell, your trajectory was downhill. So the fall zone was a very narrow isosceles triangle. So you were going to fall downhill, and so you didn't have to protect everything. And now, because the skis turn so quickly and unpredictably at times, you have to protect everything. So you're almost creating a corridor, wall to wall, down an entire mountain with this A-net, which is millions of dollars.
Wow.
Just that part of it.
Yeah.
Right? And it used to be, fortunately, I came on the tail end of this, but it was hay bales, right?
Yes.
And you've been in Sun Valley long enough to know if you put a little water on some hay bales, and it kind of melts, and then it freezes overnight. It's no longer a hay bale. It's just like a brown block of ice. So that's how long I've been at it.
Yeah, okay.
And so just that sort of thing. So the way that skiers come down the mountain. And because the skiers are always figuring out a way to go faster, the courses always have to be slowed down. And the more you slow them down, in a lot of ways, the more dangerous they become because they're hitting these severe angles. And then when the severe angles increase, the loads increase. So just because you're going slower doesn't mean it's not more violent. I, as a glider, was so much happier going in a straight line at 90 miles an hour than making lefts and rights at 50 miles an hour in bumpy terrain. Right. And so that's what being asked of these athletes now, because the skis don't slow down in the turns. They have to make the turns bigger, and the turns become more violent, and you sort of invite more places to crash, and then you have to protect more. So that's what I've seen. And so the racers also become a lot stronger and more robust. And so, in terms of them impressing me, some of the things that, I don't know, Ted Ligety, who I've done some broadcasting with, is, sort of changed what giant slalom skiing is, where his hip is like this far off the ground, and he's pulling 3.5 Gs, and he's not making a mistake for 44 turns in a row. And then you go out and you ski behind him, and it's like this. There's a concussion that comes through like the snow. You're like, this is so gnarly and violent, and he just makes it look like ballet.
Wow.
Yeah. And so we can't be friends. Yeah.
Well, back into the athletes. Harry had another question. What kind of community experiences will athletes most enjoy and like to see?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, and that's the cool thing about finals, is that it is a spring fling, right? It's a little bit like their spring break. So don't be surprised to see the star of alpine skiing, Marco Odermatt, end up in the basement of the casino. On the day of the slalom, because he doesn't race slalom, right? So I think they want to feel like they've gone to a Western town, right? So like, I think if we can, it'll be cool. And the athletes, they have their guard down. Like sometimes the globes are already, they already know who's won the globe coming in. And so it's a great spring fling celebration. So there's a great mood. It's warm. Goes back to my memory of Sun Valley before I knew that in the winter it gets damn cold. I always thought it was super warm in Sun Valley. So you can have they're going to not believe it. You can have perfect snow conditions and like spring-like warm conditions in the finish, hanging out at Apples, in the street party there. And the athletes, they'll get involved, right? They're going to be, I think, the one thing about my misgiving about what's happened over the last 40 years is that because it's become so professionalized and there's so much demand on them, and a guy that's a star of the sport will have to go to the finish line and speak to everybody because there's 20 different languages that want to speak to him, and he's got to. It's not like the NBA where Jordan goes and he speaks to the local guys and he speaks to the beat reporters and speaks to TV and he's done. It's like, it is brutal for the guys that are the best. But come springtime, it'll be way looser. And I think that we've over professionalized to the point we don't get to see their personalities. We don't allow those venues. We don't allow that time and space for them to be kind of, there's a lot of cool guys, but if you give too much of yourself, you exhaust yourself. But here, it's the finish line.
Oh, that's cool.
So they can do that. They can go to the casino. They can go to Whiskey's.
Yeah. Well, we would like to thank Steve Porino for being on our podcast today. Man, it's exciting.
Yeah.
I think. Are you excited?
I'm so
in
stoked.
your hometown.
I've never worked at home.
He gets to get out of his garage.
I guess at a live event too. Yeah.
Well, hey, that's a good question for you. Where are you going to be on this?
I am told that we are going to be on site, and then I think to finish off a story I was telling earlier was that Peekaboo is going to do the analyst role. I am, as typically at the Olympics, I'm the guy up on the hill telling stories. Awesome. So we are going to replicate sort of the Olympic way we'll do things, so that Peekaboo gets her reps, because she's kind of getting back into the sport, carrying the show as analyst. Fun. And I'll be up on the hill telling all those stories about Sun Valley, and I'm so pumped to be able to do that. That's so cool.
Great.
Yeah. And then I get to go home in my own bed during daylight hours
with all your friends.
With all my friends.
Well, we appreciate your time. We're excited that this event's coming to town. We're excited to see what happens through it all. And with Steve, I think you're probably going to be pretty excited to be here, be home, and enjoy what you get to do all the time. So I think it's going to be fun to watch what you come up with. And Spencer,
I'm going to hop on the broadcast. I'm going to say hi.
Yeah.
Spencer's going to be out there with a live camera, maybe 4 of them. 4 live cameras.
Yeah, I don't even know how you know which one to look into when you're talking. Like, click on subscribe. Is it?
Subscribe. Yeah, we want to make sure we subscribe. So, yeah. So anyway, thanks you guys for hanging out with us today. Enjoy the month, and we'll be back next month.
Yep.
Don't forget to show up for the finals.
Yeah.
I don't know
True.
what
Yeah.
If you're local and would like to rent out your home for the 2025 World Cup, scan the code here on the left to get started. And whether you're local or not, scan the code on the right to learn how you can volunteer for the event.